Mr. Mike Selby, how are you, sir?
Very good, Mr. Matthew Gordon.
Yeah, well, thanks for dialing in. I know you're on a roadshow at the moment, meeting potential investors. So, how's the interest out there?
Oh no, it's great. As I said, we've been, over the last 6 months or so, we're getting good long-term, high net worth institutions who are contrarian view on the market, really starting to take a look. And we just started working with someone a couple of weeks ago, and have had a whole series of good meetings, and had a dinner here last night. So yeah, no, it's been very good. So and a bunch more coming through the month of August. So very much looking forward to it.
Fantastic, fantastic, fantastic. Look, okay, we better catch up on the news. We always start with price. So, where are we at today?
Sure. Yeah, no, we are in the doldrums of August. So today is going to be a little bit quiet in terms of news. When we got last talked about 2 weeks ago, nickel had moved up into the upper half of the 15 to 15,800 range. And then since we last talked, we've now moved down into the bottom end of the range, and today sitting either side of $15,000 a ton. We saw a little tick up in LME nickel stocks, about 6,000 tons. Again, nowhere near the kind of inventory build that are, quote, the reported surpluses that we talked about last week. And again, overall not in a bad place. The key thing is ore prices are continuing to hang in around the same levels. There's been lots of the Chinese are trying to talk down ore prices. So you see a bunch of stories talking about more supply coming, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, ore prices are hanging in there. And what's interesting now is we're finally, this past week, we saw a tick up in both nickel pig iron prices and Chinese stainless steel prices. And we talked about before, Chinese stainless steel prices are a good sign. If those are starting to move up, then that's a sign, that the market might be moving in the right direction. The next couple of weeks are really going to be sort of a key piece. All the mines should be operating at close to full capacity. So we'll see what happens in terms of ore prices. I expect they come off a little bit, but if they hang in anywhere close to this, for the next 4 to 6 weeks, that sets up an interesting November, December, when the Philippines, half of their production shuts down, and the market is going to be tighter. So interesting. It's a quiet period, but it'll be a pretty interesting period to see where we are in about 3 or 4 weeks from now.
What's the news out of China, somewhat more broadly?
Yeah, so one of the things that was helping with nickel pig iron and stainless prices is this whole effort now, the Chinese, in terms of involution, in terms of, hey, you know what, it doesn't make sense to have all this excess capacity, which is crushing prices, causing deflationary pressure in the Chinese economy, and not generating any profit by producing whatever product it is. So steel is one of those areas that they're looking to rationalize capacity, including stainless steel. So this sort of focus on trimming capacity and helping to make industry overall a little more profitable is great. So that may have played into some of the boost that we've seen in the NPI and stainless prices. But again, at least the overall Chinese macro is heading in the right direction as far as Western producers is concerned. So
right. And so how's this impacting the market? What are the stories that we should be paying attention to at the moment?
Yeah, so what you should be looking for is a series of sort of shutdowns and closures, right? So looking for province X in this province to either shut down a bunch of aluminum smelters or steel mills or something like that they've forced the closure of this amount of capacity from these different provinces. Because again, once you get a sort of a national edict in terms of what the policy is, each of the local governors will want to score points politically. So they'll be working to look and at least announce and then potentially close some of this capacity. So again, that's not going to play out in the next few weeks. That's something to keep an eye on through the balance of the year.
Right. Okay. And well, let's get into a bit of company news. Obviously, one of the sort of unusual names in the story and unconventional in the traditional sense, metals company. They've come out with a PFS. I mean, what's your read on that?
Yeah. So first glance, it came out yesterday. So these are the deep sea nodule guys. Have had a great run in the share price. I think it's up almost 10x. So kudos to the company in terms of the share price. They work closely. They got a couple of U.S. government supportive announcements out that help buoy the stock in terms of their ability to get permits. The key thing, the big NPV, big IRR numbers. They had a previous PEA type report that was also equally buoyant. the thing that I have to see, sort of look at is, what are the real operating costs of this are going to be. They've never been done before, right? And I think they would help themselves. They've been criticized. There was a great short report written a couple months ago, really highlighting the fact that it would be very helpful if they had a big engineering firm, sign off on what's in one of these reports, just to help give some. Again, that's not always 100%, but it's very helpful in places like this. When I'm not sure they file under SEC rules, which are different than under the TSX. So they filed something like a 43-101 report. But there's things like, it looks like they can have internal company people sign off on certain sections. And I know for us, unless you're a producer, you have to have independent third party, people do that. So I think they would help themselves if they were able to, to get a giant engineering firm to sign off on those things with investors. But again, right now, the market cap's a couple $2 billion. So, kudos to them. The other piece that I always get asked around the whole nodules are people saying, well, is this going to disrupt the nickel market? And this report, backs up the point that I make to people is when you look at the grade, these nodules have nickel, copper, cobalt, and manganese. They're about 30% manganese. And so, based on the production report that's there, when they're fully ramped up with their, with their phasing that they have now, they produce about 100,000 tons of nickel, which by 2030 would be about 2% of nickel production. The challenge for them is they'd also produce about 3 million tons of manganese in certain forms. And that's about 15% of the manganese market, which is a market that isn't growing very quickly as blast furnace iron ore, consumption kind of levels out going forward. So, the good part is, no, I'm not nervous about a fully ramped up nodule operation that's there, and still a little question mark around, what the operating costs are going to look like going forward. The good thing on the capital cost side for their refinery, they've got a phase where they build a refinery in the U.S. It's a $4 billion refinery, which for a hydromet plant is a reasonable estimate of what that would cost. Again, we've had a bunch of juniors talk about building hydromet plants for $600 or $700 million, which doesn't happen in today's world. So that part's good, but again, just a question mark on the operating costs going forward.
It's kind of interesting. I was fascinated by groups that kind of come into claim to be able to take a big chunk of the market. I mean, the thing that kind of, I know we're talking nickel today, but my eyes lighting up and going, I wonder how that plays out. 3 million ton per annum of manganese, 15% of world supply. What does that do for the price of manganese, which is, I say, not in short supply, and what does this do to the bottom line of a company like this, who maybe as a byproduct are putting a dollar value against that as something which possibly suppresses prices going forward, or certainly contributes in a large way to suppressing price going forward. So how do you treat that on your balance sheet? So I want to look out for as well in terms of this PFS when we kind of delve into it a little bit more.
For sure.
Okay. I just want to get a couple of questions. A couple of themes in terms of conversations going on in the market, and I just get your thoughts on it would be great. Because I think the general consensus is that there's a price projected recovery in 2026. I think you perhaps have a bit more insight than most of those guys coming up with that one, but nevertheless, that seems to be everything that I'm reading from various, I guess, influential people in the space. So to do that, there's a few things going on. There's a conversation going on about oversupply, and this story persists. Indonesia expanding production capacity continues to strain prices. Gives you a summary of that component of the mix.
Yeah. So basically, Indonesia is an OPEC of one country. Nickel and stainless steel, as we said, is their single biggest export, and the value of the nickel and stainless steel matters to the Indonesian economy. They've pushed ore prices up almost $3,000 a ton. That's what they've doubled, but to a producer, it's about $3,000 per ton of nickel. Tsingshan's been sort of helping, using that big squeeze and keeping prices down to kind of squeeze out their competitors. They will need to let somebody make some money, and including themselves making a little more money, and so you will see prices start, that transmission of higher ore prices will work its way through to LME nickel prices. And again, I think you'll see a little step up in September, and then an even bigger step up when the Philippines mine shut down come the winter time. And so, again, very supportive of the view that, we will see prices move up into the $18,000 to $20,000 range, by the end of this year, early next year. Indonesia just makes more money from a limited resource, to do that. That's fundamentally, the driver that's there. Again, in terms of oversupply, right now where the big ramp ups are really coming is not so much on the NPI production, but on the HPAL output, and which produces this mixed hydroxide. Prices for mixed hydroxide, are close to the highest intermediate, highest percentage of the LME price that they've been in a while. So, again, if there was really an oversupply coming in that particular sector, you would have started to see those discounts come off, and that hasn't been the case. So we'll see how we go forward. But I think the next 3 weeks is going to see whether the Chinese owning of the market is going to actually work or not. And then it'll be setting up for the fall. These 2 legs to come.
Okay, and the next bit, I want a little bit of commentary on each of these topics, which just keep coming into us. Okay, around tariff uncertainty and geopolitical dynamics affecting short-term trading sentiment. Obviously, I'm thinking of the US, China specifically here, but you can talk more broadly if that's relevant.
Yeah, no, for us, the great thing with nickel, US has one mine, will shut down in a few years, no nickel processing capacity to speak of. Europe is net short nickel. So, for us at the end of the day, whether if the big orange monster is still in the White House when we're going, then we'll just sell all our stuff in Europe. Europe actually likes lower carbon product, and so that's the one market that will pay premiums for low carbon products. So we're not really affected by all the nonsense. It's a lot of noise, right? It's not helpful, but specifically to nickel, there's no impact there. So
right, okay. And what's the just again the effect of stockpiling? China's nickel purchasing, may stabilize prices temporarily, but and maybe affect global sentiment somewhat. But what's the kind of long-term effects of that behavior? And can they maintain it?
No, the Chinese strategic stockpiles, when they buy that stuff, it's locked away. There was a few times where we had the big nickel squeeze where, there was talk of them delivering some nickel into the market to alleviate pressure. And they did that back in 2006-07 as well. But, those, again, nickel's used in a bunch of armaments and so forth. So it is when you talk about strategic critical minerals, it's one of the most strategic and most critical. And so, again, there were stories back in the big squeeze 2 or 3 years ago that the Chinese government effectively lent Tsingshan a bunch of that nickel, LME deliverable nickel, to help cover their short position. So, net, I'm not sure where we're sitting today versus a while ago, but the way to think about that nickel, it's gone, locked away, and it's not going to come back unless the market, just trading probably 2x or 3x where it is today. So.
Right. Okay. And then I guess finally a little bit on the US here in a way, in terms of exploration. Obviously, with low nickel prices, most explorers can't afford to get after this stuff, even if they did find an asset worth chasing. Things like MP Materials investment by the US government, Department of Defense, $400 million. Critical mineralists seem to mean a little bit more these days than just this theory of supply, demand, and yawning gaps in the future markets. Do you think that exploration companies in the West will be able to find money, alternative financing, call it what you will? Will government step in, and will this kind of ex-China production have a chance of getting off the ground?
Yeah, so I would say it's going to sort of trickle down. So you're going to see. So in Canada, we had Torngat Metals as a private company. They received $100+ million bridge financing from Export Development Canada and another Canadian institution. Again, they've got the largest rare earth deposit in Canada, and they're at a pre-feasibility study stage, and they basically are funded now right through until feasibility, until a construction decision, effectively by the government. So rare earths and graphite are the two that Chinese dominate processing most of, that's 90-95% plus, and the government's going to work down their list. So nickel is around that in terms of Chinese controlled supplies around 80%, and so you will see more deals like MP Materials, like Torngat. Governments, the tone in the last 12 months has fundamentally shifted. We're going to see, we're expecting to see, good money come from the government, both from the province and the feds this fall, because that's it. They've realized, 4 or 5 years later, there's been, almost no real projects advanced to any scale across a range of minerals, and that the only way that they're going to do that is to provide even, I said, 18 months, 24 months ago, the government is just going to keep throwing things at the sector until they see a bunch of projects get financed. And so where the trickle down comes from, I think, once investors see the governments are serious about providing the funding that's going to get these things actually built, then that's going to encourage investors to start advancing more projects. I mean, just from here in terms of 2 years ago, we were doing this nickel show every week, and we had a bunch of new drill results or things moving ahead that we could talk about. Today, there's almost no one drilling for nickel globally today, right? And that's not going to help nickel supply, 5 to 10 years from now. So the government's seen this. They've recognized that they really have to step up, and I think this fall is going to be pretty pivotal on that point.
Well, I think it's been interesting. It's kind of a case of last man standing for most explorers in the last 3-4 years, possibly longer, and never more so than with nickel, with projects like your own. You've got to be in the game to play the game, and I think a lot of people have found out the hard way that that's harder than you realize. So just back on you. Talking of which, you guys have recently released an ESG report. I mean, why bother?
Yeah. So no, I mean, it's an excellent report. The team did a great job. I think we spent less than $10,000. I think a big company, and it looks as good as anything a major company would put together, and probably spend a couple $1 million doing it. The key reason, one is, again, ESG matters, right? I mean, that's, when people wonder, okay, well, how are we able to get through the permitting process in half the time? Well, it's because we actually make it a focus and walk the talk by doing things like being one of the only juniors that publishes this kind of report, manages, that performance. We're good at it, right? So why not highlight these things? And particularly now, when you look at where the funding is going to be coming from, it's from, governments in Canada, governments in Europe. We're going to be talking with car companies, and, those issues matter to those groups, very significantly. So having not just we've done it once, here it is, but this is, the third report that we've published, really establishes our credibility, in their eyes, and it's a great communication piece, with all our stakeholders. So, it's a $10,000 that's been very, very well spent.
Mike, appreciate time. I know you're on the road, so it's always tough to kind of dial in from these places. The connection was a little bit hairy, but I think we got the gist of what you're saying. Hang on in there. We'll see you next week.
Sounds great, sir.